Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite an expert from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights and tips to help you increase productivity, reduce costs and increase profits. If there's a topic you would like to discuss, or perhaps if you'd like to make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and I'll be only too happy to talk to you about how you can make that contribution. My guest today has been at the front line of customer service for more than 25 years. He is the founder of the Secret Salesforce program, and he's the author of several books on customer service and presenting with power. I'm delighted to welcome Steve Catchick to the You and Your Business studio. Hiya, Steve.
Hi, Alec, and thank you for inviting me, in fact.
Yeah, only too delighted. The great thing about all of this virtual stuff these days is I get to speak to my friends and people abroad, and so you're more than welcome. As I've told you, I'm always keen to find out where people started their careers, and it usually starts from school. So hence, I'll take you back to those days. Tell me a bit about that.
Okay, well, I went to school in Wembley, quite close to the stadium, and I left at the age of 16, just after the World Cup, I might add. And yes, I was there at the opening games, but I couldn't afford, as a schoolboy, couldn't afford the later games. But I was there at the opening games.
Fantastic.
I left school at the age of 16 and I joined the army as a boy soldier, learning a trade. So this is the Army Apprentice College at Arborfield, where I spent 3 years learning electronics.
Wow.
And there are 4 electronic trades in the army. There's telecoms, that's radios, there's aircraft and instruments, radar, and what they used to call control equipment technician, which sounded glorious. And I thought, that sounds good. But in actual fact, it often ended up being just a glorified electrician. Vehicle electricians. It wasn't always so good.
No,
but
they know how to sell it anyway in the army.
Yeah, 3 years there. I joined with a very good friend, actually, and after 8 weeks, he was thrown out on medical grounds.
Oh, right.
And as I'd signed up for 11 years, it used to be classes 9 years from your 18th birthday, and I was only 16. It was suddenly one day I felt really low when he'd left.
Right.
I thought, wow, yeah, what, 11 years? But I made a promise to myself, serve the 11 years and then get out.
And you got a trade out of it as well.
Pardon?
You got a trade out of it as well.
Yes, I did. Yes, the electronics is the trade. Now, the army is the forefront of design, the new development, but it's many years behind industry, many, many years, because you don't just throw away the millions of pounds on developing new systems, new equipment. You know, a tank that had been in design was sort of 5 years later, it might come into the field. And it was by that time, many, many years. I worked on Chieftain tanks and the Centurion was still there. They were several years out of date.
My goodness. So tell me, what did the army teach you? Because obviously you're there a long time. What would you say were the key learnings from working in the army? Because obviously there's a lot of discipline in that there.
Yeah. I think the first one is self-sufficiency. We had to be sufficient. We had to look after our own kit. We had to repair our own kit, know how to clean the rooms, clean other things. It taught me discipline, no question of that. And I think it taught me values. I'd say it definitely taught me values. I find that a lot of people today don't seem to have the values, and it certainly does give you that, a certain amount of independence too.
It's amazing because you're learning a skill, but what you're doing is you're actually becoming a sort of repair person for the army. So they have to send you to different places to do your work. How did you find that? Well,
I joined the army to want to travel, but I didn't really travel much. My first posting was in Lincolnshire, and that was of an infantry regiment, and there was a lot of bull there, which I hated. I didn't like. I'm not into the bull aspect.
Right.
In fact, I will tell you this story. That there was the office of it. I was in a REME, so we had our own officer, but under the company, they also had the company officer, and he used to do almost daily inspections. And this one day, I went to a shop in Carnaby Street in London called I Was Lord Kitchener's Valet. They used to sell all sorts of gimmicks and signs. And I bought this one poster that just said, "Piss off." I hope I can say that all right here.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
And I hung it up inside my locker. So it's on the inside. Well, this officer decided to inspect and open my locker. And he was fuming when he saw that sign and said, "You're on a charge." However, the Marine captain said, "No, that's ridiculous. You're not." And they had an argument between the two of them. And in the end, this other officer wasn't able to put me on a charge. So he called me in to have me stand up for 5 minutes while he just swore at me. So, but I'm happy to say that after that, my next posting was in Germany, and it was with tank regiments. And I actually loved the time with tank regiments, especially when it was with the 4th Tank Regiment, as opposed to just Dragoon Guards. They tend to be more looking after the equipment and a lot less bull, but there was still obviously the discipline.
Yeah,
I loved it. I loved it in Germany.
Right. Yeah.
I loved my time in Germany. I spent 5 years altogether, between 70 and 76 in Germany, with just a year back in England.
Oh, fantastic. Did you learn to speak
I
German?
did volunteer to go to Cyprus when I got posted to a new unit. 2 of us got posted there the same day back from our course from England. We'd been back to England for a course. And Colin didn't want to go, I did. They sent him and not me.
Typical.
But even so, I really had a great time in Germany, and I made a lot of German friends. Used to go out. I even joined the German football club.
Great stuff. Good.
Played 2 games before I got posted back to England.
Fantastic. But I mean, those days in the army were going to come to an end. So you were given the choice, obviously, either you sign up again or get out into Civvy Street. So what was your choice?
The choice is really harsh. You either sign up again or you leave and look for a job. Now, in Civvy Street, very few people chuck their job in before they've got another one to go to. But on leaving the army, it's just a fact. On this set date, you are no longer employed unless you re-sign.
Wow.
So finding the first job, I think the first job I found, in fact, the first couple probably weren't ideal. Certainly the first one was definitely not what I enjoyed doing, but you get a job.
Yeah.
It's electromechanical engineering. But over time, I moved to find a place in data communications. And that's when I really found a place I loved, the right type of work I loved. Looking after the networks, connecting different equipment, different computers and terminals from one town to another, etc.
Right. And what happened then?
Well, companies kept getting kept getting merged, which meant there were redundancies. I was made redundant once. Actually, I've made redundant twice. Once before that, but made redundant from one job. But within a couple of days, I had another one. And as it happened, the manager who made me redundant knew I was employed before I did, because I went for another company in London, and it was his brother-in-law was the manager there.
Oh.
So, and obviously I must have had a good reference as well. And that company was really good, a company called Infotron. They were really great. And they were there for me later on, because it was back in 1990 when I lost my wife to cancer.
Oh, very sad to hear that.
And the company were there. They were full support. I was looking after my sons. They were only 5 and or 8 and 9 at the time. And I was off work solid for about 5 months or 6 months.
Wow.
Being paid before my manager said to me one day, look, I can cover for you indefinitely as long as you can come in for a couple of hours a day.
Right.
And they were so good that way. Brilliant job.
Yeah. But isn't it great when you have a culture like that within a company?
Their culture was all about people. It was a brilliant company. The support was there. The fun was there. But it was an American-owned company with 8 offices in UK. And the American side went down. So they sold us off to a company called Gandalf.
Right.
And a couple of years later, the American side of Gandalf went down, and the 8 offices in the UK were bought into IBM, 40 off of 50 engineers. So it was a bit of a challenge. We suddenly had less people to do the same job, but IBM bought in the service arm to start up a networks or datacomms department. And that's how I got into IBM.
What was it like to work for a multinational like that?
It's funny, in the army, I was an 8-digit number. In IBM, I was a 6-digit number. That's what it was like.
Great. And so how did you find your way around IBM? How did you find them as employers, and what sort of key learnings were you taking from working with them?
It's a big organization. It's funny enough, I was there for about 12 years. I never considered myself an IBMer, as in people who've been there for 30, 40 years, stuck to it. But one thing I did learn is most big organizations, they survive because they've adapted. Now, they are slow to change. They're not like a small business owner who can change very quickly and offer things on the spot almost. They have processes and a big structure. But when they make a strategy decision, it goes through. It just might take a bit of time, but it always goes through. So one thing I learned is that they are very determined to see through. And IBM have changed many times over the years. They've had to adapt, and they have done. They've been going for a long, long time, and I think they'll be going for still one of the market leaders.
Fantastic. My goodness, it's, you know, they're a legend anyway, certainly in the corporate world. So did you find yourself moving around IBM, or had you any particular interest in it?
Yeah, I moved around a bit because I started off in the customer support as a team leader. I was brought in that way. I went on to a project, and at the end of that, when that finished, I went into another role, which I must admit I didn't really like. I don't know why I went into that one. But fortunately, later on, I managed to get into, I was a site manager for a while. And actually, then I went on to a role which they called operational account managers and things around that. And we used to sit in between sales, service, customers, and help desk and contracts, which meant that we took the brunt of all those people, because when things weren't right, we were the ones that the customer would contact in between. And we had to look at the revenue and the health of the revenue and the health of the profit as well. We're looking at cost and revenue. But it was during this time, I actually took a voluntary role outside of IBM, started doing personal development in my own time.
Right.
It was then my second marriage. I'd remarried and it was breaking up.
Right.
And I wondered, what was I doing? So I started personal development, and I did the Landmark education system, the Landmark Forum, the advanced course, the self-expression and leadership program. And then I coached 6 people through that when I was on a quiet spell at IBM. That's to say, I was on a quiet spell the day before I started that, but the day I started it, I was put on a different account, cross territory, and had to drive 2 or 3 times a week, an hour and a half drive to Welwyn Garden City, looking after I won't say who it was a challenging retail account, let's put it that way.
Right. Yeah, fantastic. So, okay, so you had to deal with them, and challenging, of course, in many ways, also kind of makes you a harder person in business. You learn so many things dealing with them, even though you don't like working with them. Yeah,
and it was interesting because at the end of that program I was on, the program for the Landmark, I was feeling quite worn out, and my friend of mine who's working at IBM, and he's Bayesian, and he said, well, I said, I'm going to go for a holiday. And he said, I'm going back to Barbados for a family reunion. Come with me. And it was brilliant. 17 days living with locals, going out with locals in Barbados. And to tell you, I mean, nothing is as laid back as a Bayesian, and especially as your dad was a Bayesian pensioner. Bayesian pensioners are sort of static. It's great.
Great.
No, it was great. But I came back and I had a day I heard about a sabbatical option. I had a day to make up my mind.
Right.
And I was a bit nervous because I just turned in my 50s, and you get nervous thinking, well, what if it doesn't work out, and what do I do? But I took it. And that was in December, but I had to take it at the end of December.
Right.
So end of January, I had my back part ready, and I took out to Southeast Asia for a few months.
Good for you. So you enjoyed that anyway?
I thoroughly enjoyed that. I came back half-heartedly wanting to start a coaching business, but my heart was still traveling. And it was the following January or February, I think it was, and I decided to go to New Zealand for a month for a friend's wedding.
Right.
Went there and met up with someone else, an American guy, to go partly traveling together. Jumped off a mountain, paragliding, and fractured my ankle.
Nice one. Good.
Yeah.
One.
So I came back, and it was not healing easily. So I went back to IBM more out of fear, because I didn't intend going back. But I went back and I started then saying, I want, looking to doing programs for them. I started volunteering to run the meetings, to organize things, to speak, because I'd joined a speaking club by then. And then I also did my neuro-linguistic programming training. I did a practitioner, master practitioner, and trainers training. So that's when I offered to start doing training for IBM, when I heard they were paying someone else to do it.
Right. So, I mean, well, there's a couple of things there. Number one is always say yes. And number two is put yourself forward to do voluntary things, and you suddenly find yourself in the right place.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. The more you put in, I found every time I go somewhere, the more you put in, the more you get out, every time.
So they were paying people to come in and train, and yet you had the ability to do some of this yourself.
Yeah, they've got someone in to do some sales training. Now, the guy wasn't a trainer. He used to be a professional negotiator, and he used to compete against IBM on behalf of their customers to drum down their prices. He negotiated that he'd only have three salespeople on a course at a time, charging $1,000 a day.
Nice one.
Nice one, yeah, nice work if you can get it. But I heard, and because I kept mentioning that I could do that, they actually had me helping him out, and we got on quite well together as it happened.
Right.
So at the end of the sales training was going on, there was a decision to do something for the engineers, and that was again in December. And actually, before Christmas, I had a course ready for a customer care program for the engineers and also for the managers, and eventually for the help desk too.
So that was a real you had found your home.
Yes, I found that I really love doing training and speaking. That's where I'm in my best. Standing up in a group, being with the group, interacting with the group.
Just for our audience who want to know more about you, what's your website? Where can they find out more about you?
The website is stevecatchick.com. And to make that easy, it's a cat and a chick put together. stevecatchick.com.
Catchick.com.
That's always my late wife used to say.
Excellent. That's good. Tell me about your programs. You've created a program. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I mean, I've been for some years running programs on public speaking or presentation skills. So I do that anyway. One of them is also on handling those challenging questions, techniques and structures for handling challenging questions. I do one on developing a powerful executive presence. That's more a talk, an interactive talk, but that's part of my presentation skills program. The presentation skills has got what I call a 7C model. I break it down into different parts.
Right.
But I've been doing customer service. I've been in customer service in one form or another most of my career. So I've been doing a number of customer service trainings, and I've developed a program which I call the Secret Salesforce.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, now, again, I believe that everyone in an organization should be in service first, including the CEO, in sales second, and in leadership third. Yeah. That's what I call an ambassador. So the Secret Salesforce is not aimed at the sales teams. It's aimed at all the rest of the front office, the back office, accounts receivable, who can be saboteurs. Because I say that in the organization, you want to develop the ambassadors. But every organization will have a handful of saboteurs, and the majority who are in the middle, the neutrals. And the aim is to drive the neutrals up to become ambassadors and to manage the saboteurs.
Right. Wow, that's fantastic, because I think people overlook the hidden assets within their own organizations.
It is a hidden resource. And that's why I call it the Secret Salesforce, because many companies don't realize that they really have one there if only they activate it. But that does mean you have to motivate and engage people.
Yeah, and it's about self-leadership as well.
It's definitely about self-leadership, which is why I say everybody should be in sales, in service, and in leadership. And by leadership, I don't mean running a company. It's about self-leadership.
I remember you telling me a good story about this. It was around New Year's Eve or something many years ago you were talking about.
Yeah, Christmas, yes. I tell the story of my youngest son, who was a budding thespian at the time.
All right.
Which means he was an actor, a waiter. And how he came home for Christmas wanting a specific dressing gown, a very expensive one from John Lewis. And I bought it for him, but it was the wrong size. Now, being as he was a waiter, he had to go back to work on the 27th of December. And I managed to get into John Lewis on the morning of the 27th. And I saw a sign saying no refunds or exchanges till the new year.
Wow.
But I found an assistant somehow, because it was the first day of the sales, it was packed. And I found an assistant, and she did the right thing. The long and short is that she went up, got the part, I'm used to talking engineer terms, got the right stock and brought it down, took me to an unused till, opened it, dealt the transaction, wished me a happy new year.
Wow. Wow. There's that I suppose embodies everything you're talking about.
That covers everything. She was in sales because she was doing the sale. She was in service, putting the customer first, and she stepped up to take ownership, ignoring the management guidelines. And that's what I mean about being an ambassador, taking ownership.
And we just don't see enough of that. I sort of, my own sort of observations on it, and the real problems are at the very top, where people seem to see themselves as directors and don't seem to have any other role within the organization.
I'm a firm believer that the CEOs should be first and foremost setting the example, and they should be in service first. That's a belief of mine. And I think if you do, the companies that really are strong, you see the C-level, the C-suite people thereabout. They're there, they're practical, they're helping there. They know their people's names, they know their teams, that all the people in there. They talk to the individuals. They are there. And I actually wrote a brief article, I think, on LinkedIn recently about Marks and Spencer's.
Right.
Wondering how they're going to, the survivors, how they're going to survive. What are they going to do differently? And I do believe that the managers need to be seen on the shop floor and helping out if necessary, because it sets the example.
Yeah, I think it's quite a common problem, particularly with the large retailers. That is, it's very unlikely you will see somebody of a senior rank patrolling the floors.
Yes, and yet it makes such a difference to morale when they're there.
Yes, it certainly does. And certainly if they roll up their sleeves and are seen to get involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've often wondered because, because they end up being so remote from their own staff, they haven't a clue actually what's going on. They don't experience what the customer experiences.
Well, I think the good organizations do this. Unfortunately, I don't think there's enough. But you need to be involved. You need to really know what's going on. Another tool I'm a firm believer in is engagement surveys. And I don't mean things run by HR.
Right.
Nobody trusts an HR run survey is anonymous.
Right.
And it's time consuming. So you want something that's done externally, quickly, easily, automatic and totally anonymous. But you need to do it regularly. And the manager needs to act on what may be tough sort of feedback. They need to be demonstrating that they're listening.
And how do you kind of sort out those who just have a gripe as opposed to those who have a genuine contribution to make?
Well, as I say, there's three types of people, but I actually say that there's three types, but I grade it into 4 levels of engagement.
Right.
I talk about the saboteurs, and the saboteurs are totally disinterested. They only think for themselves. They undermine, they talk behind your back or the company's back. They're the people that you don't want to sit next to when they come to sit down and take the energy out of the room. And I always say, if you don't know who they are, you're probably one of them. And then you have the neutrals, and they're just in between. And neutrals I split into 2 parts. I say there's those who are somewhat engaged. They'll be job's worth. They'll do their job, but no more, and possibly only when they're being watched sometimes. But the other half of the engaged, the neutrals, are what I call engaged. They're solid performers. They're good. But Jim Collins wrote in his book, From Good to Great, that good is the enemy of great. And a good performer doesn't encourage you, doesn't give you that feel-good factor when you interact with them. Whereas the ambassadors, I say, are fully engaged. They drive the business forward. They live the business. They really talk about the business and enthuse about it. And they're the people that just love being around. They give you that feel-good factor.
And what are your views on the key, I suppose, ingredients of self-leadership?
I think self-leadership starts with you understanding your values. You've got to understand your values and demonstrate them. And that's another challenge, is if you're working for a company where the values don't match your own, you really need to look and think, am I fitting in here? Because sometimes people who are neutrals, low end or saboteurs, it's because they don't match the values, sometimes.
And I think also one of the greatest challenges around that is the values of a company. You'll see it in a picture of 4 guys in a rowing boat rowing and saying all going in the same direction. And that's how the company sees itself, which is a cliche, really.
I mean, I often quote this one. The Ritz-Carlton, for instance, has an ethos, and it's on their website, that says, we are ladies and gentlemen who serve, ladies and gentlemen. And to me, values is about the culture, living the values. It's to demonstrate it all the way through. Does it run throughout the whole core of a business? Fundamental, just like a speech. The premise has to be the central message that runs throughout, the key message. So,
speaking of such, you're a professional speaker these days and topics, but you also, I think you coach around that area as well, do you not?
I do coach I have done speech coaching, and I do enjoy doing that, seeing people quickly grow. And I love doing presentation skills training, because you can, that I think is, well, presentation skills training particularly, you can see the results very quickly, whereas other types of training on the customer service, the Secret Salesforce, it takes a bit more longer to see the results as people demonstrate it. But yeah, I do coach people on speaking skills.
And what are the key mistakes people make in the presentation side, without giving away too many skills, but obviously there's common mistakes people make?
Well, I mean, I'd say that one of the things is delivery is great, and that's fine. Most people like to start with delivery, and delivery, they like the confidence to deliver. I've seen many people think, well, I'm confident speaking, and they think that's enough. Well, it's not enough. No one cares how confident you are. What people want is to be confident in the way you put together your talk, the way you engage, and the way you structure it, and the way you can relate it to them. So there's so many different aspects. Definitely the structure, constructing the script, definitely being clear on a core message that runs throughout. The use of stories. If you're going to use visuals, and I'm very careful to say visuals, not necessarily slides.
Sure,
and you've got to decide, what is the visual? What's it doing?
Right.
And if you're doing slides, a phrase I was given by actually a member in the PSA, Dave Henson, says every slide, in fact, I've heard it by many people, even before him, in fairness, yes, every slide should fight for the right to be in that presentation.
No, I think that's a valuable tip, all right, for people to take away.
Yeah. And the other question is, do you need slides at all? Often a simple prop can do the job. And right, visual descriptive language, good rhetoric.
I noticed from our conversation you've been very keen about self-education and learning. Tell me, what are the sort of roles mentors have played in your life, or how important do you think they are in the life of a business person or an SME owner of that?
Well, I think there's a difference between the mentoring, of course, and coaching. And I've had a mixture of some. In some ways, the mentors I've had haven't been necessarily formal mentors, but people I've trained with and I've been able to go to and ask the odd questions. I've certainly paid for coaching, personal coaching, business coaching, and speech coaching. So I've paid for all of those at different times. And I still have a speech coach, even though I coach. And I believe that you need to walk your talk.
Right. And you need to invest in yourself and the skills needed in your particular sector that you're operating.
Yeah. I've invested a lot more than I've needed to over the last, 18 years. Some things were, looking back, was this unnecessary, but mostly have been good. And I won't even put a figure on it, but it's under 100,000, but over 50.
Right. And for our listeners there, tell them where they can find out more about you, Steve.
Well, you can find out clearly from my website, stevecatchick.com, and that's a cat and a chick put together. My LinkedIn profile, which is the linkedin.com/in/Steve Catchick. All
right, cool. That'll do. As I get to the end of the show, and we've probably just about a minute left, or a minute and a half left. You've written a number of books. Tell us just a bit about a couple of them, just that might engage your audience. And,
well,
they can download them.
Yeah.
Too, yeah.
It's been ebooks mainly. I mean, I've written booklets on a guide to customer care. I've written on a quick reference guide on public speaking, and it's got a number of chapters, simple little tips. I've written a book, what I call an ebook, on how to maximize your return on relationships. And that's, again, focusing on building a business through the relationships, through the customer care. And a book I've still written, but haven't yet put up. I'm just trying to find the title. And that's looking at my 7C model, really, on public speaking or presenting.
And these books are these available on your website? Are they free, or do you pay for them?
They're available on my website, yes.
Right.
The new one which the one that's going at the moment, the one on public speaking. I haven't come up with the right title yet, but I want to. Once I've published that, I will be doing one on the Secret Salesforce, because that is the new program.
Well, there's a great way to finish the show. So if you want to find out more about Steve Catchick and get these ebooks, go to stevecatchick.com. That's cat and a chick put together. You see, I remember that. That was nice and easy.
Yeah.
Certainly, Steve, I'd like to thank you very much